Hello everybody and welcome back to a brand new video from me, Pickles Parker Reviews. Now, just a quick update on where I've been because I haven't been making videos recently. Now, it's a pretty simple explanation. I've been super busy. January has been a particularly busy month for me, given that it was the deadline to get all my uni choices done. I had to pick 5 unis and I had to get that done by the end of January. Plus, I've had loads of coursework bits to do, so I had to make a short film for media coursework, including obviously writing, acting and editing, so that was a lot of work, as well as other little coursework bits. And I've also had mocks as well. Actually, I'm currently in the middle of my 2-week A-level mock period, which has obviously been quite stressful, and I've had to do revision and things, so it's been a very full-on month, hence videos sort of obviously had to take a back seat, and I obviously haven't made a video since my Eve of the Daleks review, but that doesn't mean video ideas haven't been ticking away in my head. I've just obviously had more pressing matters to attend to, mostly involving, you know, the end of sixth form and me actually becoming an adult and moving out and going off to a different part of the country and going to uni and all scary adult things. But in the sort of mindset of trying to ignore all of that and remaining a child, I thought I'd discuss Doctor Who, everyone's favourite show that's definitely not controversial at all at the moment. One of the controversial takes that I've been seeing on Twitter. When don't we see controversial Doctor Who takes on Twitter regarding the current era? But there's a take sort of about how Doctor Who will be remembered and how Jodie Whittaker's era will be remembered when Jodie leaves. I believe it was a comment by Matt Stevens, the producer, or one of the producers of this current era, who said that he believes that this era will sort of garner a reputation within the fandom similar to the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy eras of not really being liked at the time, but sort of gaining a sort of cult status in the years since, and people gaining a lot more of an appreciation for them and just appreciating the good aspects of that era more. And he said that he thinks this era will sort of gain a similar treatment, and then you had lots of people on Twitter saying that no, this era is far worse than the Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy eras, that it's fundamentally broken and it will never get a resurgence in popularity. And to be honest, I agree with Matt Stevens actually. I think this era will be viewed higher in the estimations of fans in the years after it ends, as opposed to now, because I think that's just sort of how Doctor Who works. I think that's how media works in general, and I think people saying, well, this era's bad, why would people gain an appreciation for it in the years since? But I think that's because in the years since, people look at things more with rose-tinted glasses. People sort of, when talking about older things, they'll only really mention if someone's good. Like, you think about the Capaldi era or the Moffat era, people will talk about, you know, oh yeah, remember when Moffat did this, or remember when Moffat did that really good thing, or, you know, rewatching the Moffat era, I only realised how good this thing was. You don't really hear people doing that and saying the Moffat era is bad, and you know what I mean. So I feel as if people will only really comment on it if they think it is good. But also I think we're so focused on like all aspects of it now that I feel as if when we move on and go into another era, we can then look at this era a bit more favourably. You don't need to worry about it being the current era, you don't need to worry about certain things in this era and where it will go. After knowing everywhere it went and, you know, tying it up with a nice little bow, I think we can look back at it retrospectively and sort of, you know, appreciate the good parts of it, because that's the case with the McCoy era, right? People don't, you know, say that the bad aspects of the McCoy era are good. They just look at the good bits and say, hey, maybe we should have given that a bit more credit. You know what I mean? It's the same with the resurgence of the Capaldi era. People appreciate Capaldi more, people appreciate Moffat more, and that's not people ignoring Moffat's shortcomings. I think it's just people saying, maybe we didn't give Moffat enough credit for being very experimental, or, you know, God, I miss this aspect of Moffat that you perhaps didn't necessarily like at the time. I think people will look back at certain showrunners or certain eras or certain doctors as almost like a flavour, right? And you'll say, hey, maybe I missed that flavour, you know, maybe I didn't always like that flavour, but it was a flavour that we don't get anymore, and, you know, it was something different. And I think that maybe that's the case with Jodie Whittaker's Doctor, that whole sort of socially awkward aspects of her Doctor that I don't really think works. I don't think her character works, that sort of lack of authority, that sort of thing, which I think is very detrimental to her character. But I think in the years later, we'll sort of see her Doctor for what she is and look at the aspects of the Doctor that are very unique to her and sort of see where the production team were going with it, if that makes sense, and say, you know, I appreciate that that was a different take, and you can sort of appreciate that different take for what it is now that it isn't the incumbent, if that makes sense. I think it's very similar to Capaldi, whereas I wasn't really a big fan of his Doctor at the time, but now looking back I can sort of appreciate what they were going for and appreciate Capaldi's Doctor for what he is amongst the sea of all other Doctors, right? Whereas at the time I didn't really do that, and I feel like we all can look back now. We're not worrying about, and we don't have the pressure of where this is going to go, and appreciate what good things there are in there, because there are good things in Jodie's era, even if we can't even acknowledge what these things are yet because we don't know. Looking back, there will be little things where you say, oh, I liked that, or I liked how it did that, or I really miss how it did that, for example. And I think if you look at the data, there is really no era of Doctor Who that has got a worse reception in the years since. I think every era of Doctor Who, its, you know, reception after it has ended has gone up. People have found more enjoyment in it, or looked back at it and found aspects of it that perhaps didn't get that much credit at the time of airing, and thinking, you know, hey, maybe we should have appreciated that a bit more. You know, I'd say every era gains more of a cult status after it ends. Say the only era that you can argue has gone down in fan estimation is maybe the Smith era. You know, people seem to criticise that a bit more than it was at the time, but I'd say that's really the only era. I'd say every single era has probably garnered more love after it has ended, and I think that'll be the same with Jodie's time. At the end of the day, when an era of Doctor Who ends, people will look back on it and focus on the positives. Because the thing is, when you rewatch aspects of Doctor Who, right, when you rewatch episodes of Doctor Who, you're rewatching it because you want it to make you feel good. You're rewatching it for a sense of enjoyment. So people looking back on Jodie's era, I think, will rewatch it because of the aspects that they like, and they'll rewatch it to get a flavour of this era. And I think we will certainly look back at aspects of Chris Chibnall's writing and say, hey, I really liked this aspect, or, you know, I really liked this concept, or I really see where they were coming from. Just like with Moffat, lots of people didn't like his storytelling at the time, but now look back at it and think, you know, maybe, you know, I appreciate that for what it was. And it's similar with Sylvester McCoy and Colin Baker. Even though perhaps people can't see and just think this era is crap now and they can't see any positives, we will look back on this and, you know, appreciate the little details, because that happens with all eras of Doctor Who. People thought the Colin Baker era was horrendous at the time, but now there's been a real resurgence in popularity because people aren't necessarily saying that the bad things are good. They're saying that it wasn't all bad, and there were aspects of it that perhaps got drowned out by how bad people thought it was, that now it's over, we can sort of look more into and appreciate that aspect for what it is. That'll be the case with the Jodie Whittaker era. So I see people like JXE go on about how this won't happen because this era is fundamentally broken on a writing level. But at the end of the day, people thought that about the Colin Baker era, and to some extent it is true. That era is fundamentally broken in parts. But that doesn't stop the good aspects really rising above it and making me appreciate that era for what it is and finding some real enjoyment in it. And that will certainly be the case for the Jodie Whittaker era once it ends, as it will be for many fans. I think people are sort of misunderstanding what Matt Stevens made by this comment. He's not saying that people will think it's the best era. People just find more enjoyment in it and really look for the positives in this era, and they'll certainly find some. he's sort of saying it will gain more of a cult status like the Colin Baker era and the Sylvester McCoy era and the Capaldi era, I would argue. And I think that'll certainly be the case. It's not even in Doctor Who. You look at like the Amazing Spider-Man franchise. People really didn't like that at the time, but in the years since, now it's not the current Spider-Man franchise. People see more of the good aspects of that franchise and see more of where Mark Webb and the team and Andrew Garfield were trying to take this character. You know, they see the great emotional moments, they see the real good aspects of Andrew and his Peter Parker character, the CGI, the web swinging scenes, the look of the films, you know, the character arcs, and all. They just see the positives, and because you appreciate things more when they're gone, because you're not worrying and stressing about how bad it is and where it might go, you look back on it, and because you're already so, I think this is important, because you're already so aware of how bad you think this is, you're already aware of all the flaws, you're there more prone to pick up good things that you never noticed before, right? So when you watch things that are really good in your mind, you're more prone to picking up things that aren't so good that you didn't notice before. And it's the complete opposite for when you're watching something that you think is really bad. You're more prone to pick up little bits that you never noticed before that are actually quite good because you were so focused on what you thought was bad about it. That's what works with media in general, that's what works with Doctor Who, and that'll certainly work for Jodie's era. So even though people don't really appreciate it right now, I'm sure it will garner a bit more praise in the eras after it ends, because that's happened with every era of Doctor Who, and it will certainly happen again. Yes, thank you guys for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave a like and please drop a sub if you want to see more Doctor Who videos from me. What did you think of this video? Do you agree with me that ultimately history will follow suit and people will find enjoyment in this era after it is gone and pick up more of the positives and appreciate it for what it is rather than what it wasn't? Which I think is the big thing. People will appreciate this era for what it is and not what it wasn't. And when you're watching an era while it's coming out, you'll always want it to be something that it isn't. But when it's done and it can't be anything else, it's just that, the final package, you'll appreciate what we got because you don't have to worry about what it could be, if that makes sense. So do you agree with my take on that and think that it will get more praise after it ends, which I personally think is a no-brainer and it's not even really debatable? Personally, I think that is guaranteed to happen. But do you disagree with me and think this era is just unredeemable, even, you know, breaking the history of this continually happening in Doctor Who? Whatever you think, draw your thoughts in the comment section below. I'd be really interested to read your thoughts. But yes, thank you guys for watching. And of course, a goodbye.